Picking up from the last part, creating this blue flower-like shape, let's go in and create this very welcoming looking Venus flytrap shape. In this demonstration, starting the same way that we have before, using our Dynamesh preset, let's go ahead and open this up. And I've also gone in and enabled my Y symmetry and turned on my radial. So to begin creating a shape like this, first we can experiment with using the move brush with a higher radial count to just begin to sort of shape this surface and find the overall design and look. So keeping this Dynamesh resolution fairly low to make it very easy to do any smoothing effects while we're sort of working out these shapes. Now taking a look at the reference image, you can see here this sort of base where we have these tendril-like shapes, which we can experiment by, say, turning on the standard brush. And let's go in here and decrease that radial count. So using the standard brush in this way, if we simply click and hold our cursor, we can go in and begin to build up and create these sort of bubbly shapes on the surface. Now in this case, I'm going to go into the stroke palette and let's take a look at the lazy mouse controls. Now, the default lazy mouse control with standard is enabled and it has a lazy radius of 1. So this creates a very tiny lazy stroke. So in going through to build up a shape like so, if we disable the lazy mouse, so first let's go in and I'm going to increase this Dynamesh resolution to around 300. So we get a little bit of a higher resolution surface for better brush strokes. So now going in to just compare this simple procedure here with lazy mouse on. If we simply click and hold, we have to drag our cursor to continue to build up a shape like this, these little balls here. This example using lazy mouse. So let's go in and disable this. And if we go just below this, if we just click and hold our cursor without lazy mouse, this allows me to build up without having to drag around in a circle. So I can use this to my advantage to create nice, clean, bubbly shapes by just clicking and holding my cursor. The harder I press, the more this is going to push out from that surface. So let's undo these strokes here. And going back to the reference here, so I just want to create these small ball-like shapes here at the bottom. So finding a draw size and a radial count that works, let's go in here and just push these guys out. And we can start to smooth this out like so, and maybe make a smaller draw size to finalize these ball shapes here. Now using the smooth brush, so holding shift, I'm starting to just create these very nice, clean sort of extrusions, which I can continue to smooth out. Let's re-Dynamesh this. And now making a very small draw size, I can increase the amount of this ball sort of shooting out of that surface. So by doing just a nice, clean sort of extrusion here, you can see we can continue to push it out. However, if I would like to create a more spherical-like shape, let's take a look at another brush we can add into this process. So let's open up the brush palette by pressing B. And in the brush palette, we have the inflate brush, which we can isolate by pressing the I key. And here you'll find the inflate brush. So by selecting it, this is going to put this in my quick pick menu. So you see this exists here, which we could also go into our brush palette and you'll see that this will exist in our quick pick menu, which we can turn on our enable customize. And let's go in and hold Control and Alt and add this into our custom UI. So let's now disable enable customize and take a look at this brush. Now, as we go across the surface, this is simply going to inflate the areas where the brush is being applied. So if we go down to this little extruded area and make a smaller draw size, we can click and hold, and this will create a nice, clean, sort of inflated spherical shape. Now Control drag in to re-Dynamesh, and we can simply go in and smooth this out. So now that we have more resolution, and get a nice, clean, tendril-like shape. So you'll see draw size will affect the overall inflation of the mesh itself. So let's do one more remesh, and now we've got a nice, clean, tendril-like shape. Now moving on to the next portion. In this example, I've actually gone in and used two separate meshes. So we have a single subtool as the base, and we have a separate mesh here for the top piece that sort of overlap with this section, weaving between these tendrils here. So to begin working with multiple subtools, let's go into our subtool palette, and let's go in and append a basic sphere. So the sphere now existing in our subtool palette, this will come in by default without Dynamesh enabled. So let's go in and turn on our Dynamesh. And let's enable our move option and pull this up above that surface. Now going into our symmetry options, if we press the X key to turn on symmetry, you'll see by default this new mesh doesn't have our transform radial symmetry applied. So let's go in for this mesh and disable X, turn on Y, and enable our radial. Now let's select the move brush. And for this piece, I want to create sort of a bowl-like effect here. So the base sort of holding this as if they're two sort of connected pieces or interconnected pieces. So using the move brush, we can increase our move draw size here and start to sort of shape this within that mesh itself. And we can also increase that radial count slider to give us more points. And simply using this to push in, create that shape. Now, as we're working with multiple subtools, we can easily alt-click on the other object itself to select it, and we can solo this out. So we can go in and create more space for this second piece to sit within. And taking a look at the base here, we have some tendrils shooting off of this. So I want to go in and create some more extruded-like surfaces, but we're getting into extruding a bit further than what we have here at the base. Now going in here with a lower radial count with the move brush, we can experiment by using the move brush to simply pull out a shape like this. However, you'll see it has a bit of a tapering effect as the move brush is simply just pulling a surface away from that base surface. Let's introduce another brush into this series. So going into the brush palette, and let's take a look at the snake hook brush, which you'll find here at the base in the bottom corner. So we can select this to put this in our quick pick, and let's go in and turn on our enable customize and open up that brush palette and Control-Alt-Click to bring this into that custom UI. And then we'll disable that enable custom UI option. And now taking a look at this on the surface, this works very similarly to the move brush. However, as we pull across, it'll give us a very nice sort of snake-like effect. So as we begin to pull away from that surface, if we don't have enough resolution to create a nice shape, we can use this to create a silhouette of an extrusion coming off, and then Control-Drag to reDynamesh, and this will resurface this area that we can now go in and smooth to get a very nice, cool effect to create these tendril-like shapes. So here I'm going to go in and let's undo this and reapply. With this brush, depending on the draw size, the larger we go, the more geometry we're going to pull out from that surface. And a smaller draw size is going to create a smaller effect here. So finding the correct value to kind of go in here and create this sort of extrusion on that surface. And you'll see we're starting to stretch this out. So let's hold Control and drag to reDynamesh and get a clean surface here. So I've got a nice clean extrusion happening here that I may want to make adjustments to. However, let's unsolo this and let's take a look at the other mesh. So alt-clicking on the second mesh. Let's go back to that move brush. Now I'm going to go in and start to sort of fit this within that shape here. And here I want to go through and apply the similar extrusion. However, in this case, I want to apply it between the gaps of that first primary subtool. So by doing so here with the current radial count, you'll see we're getting too many of these radial points here. So we can go back, alt-click to the original, which has a radial count of 14. So let's go back here and we'll set this to 14 as well. And we can go through and just pull this out between the gaps here. And let's Control-Drag to reDynamesh and give us a nice clean shape. So now that we've got these overlapping correctly, we can now go in and let's experiment with some of the brushes we have available. So selecting the Inflate brush to keep this radial count and use Inflate to bump up the thickness of these shapes, and then reDynamesh to resurface. And now selecting the Move brush, we can now take this and start to pull these tendrils out and experiment with reshaping the overall surface. Now rotating to the side here, we can look at this from the front view and start to pull these down. Continuing to just use the Move brush to sort of reshape. And then let's go back and take a look at the original mesh now. And we can solo this, which we can reapply the same effect. So going into the Inflate brush, maybe making this a little bit smaller. And we can go through and do, say, an inflation at the tip area. As well as holding the Alt key with this brush, we can go through and apply a negative inflate to sort of thin out some of these areas. And then let's reDynamesh to resurface these caps here. And here I'm going to go ahead and use the Move brush, that same radial count. And then let's unsolo so we can see where these sit. And now let's apply one more sort of twisting effect. So looking at this from the top rotation view, I can go in and apply a little bit of move to just offset this. And let's take this one here. So alt selecting the second mesh, and we can now go in here and apply a nice twisting effect. So I can continue to experiment with using Dynamesh as well as the move to play around with these shapes. And then we can go in here with the move brush to pull out an area for this base. Smooth this out and apply a control drag to redynamesh. And using the same technique from the last video, we can go in with the Damien standard brush to play around with some of these other effects here, or simply going in with the standard brush. And let's decrease that radial count so we have fewer points. We can start to experiment with creating some nice sort of tendril-like shapes happening in here, offsetting these. Let's control drag. Now here you'll see I'm not quite getting the resolution I want. So let's go and increase our Dynamesh to around 300. Resurface this. And we can use the inflate brush to sort of polish out these last little bits here. Make these inflate just a bit more and remesh it. Now going in with just the move brush, we can start to experiment with twisting these. So now that we've created the overall effect that's happening here with this design, let's finish this up by assigning some color. Now in the previous video, we've gone through and assigned a base color and used the brushes to apply color for finishing details. So we can go through and take a look at this sort of purple and orange combination of colors. We can start by assigning that base color of purple to both meshes and go in and manually paint in these orange color tones to wrap this design up. So first, let's go in and find that purple color. And here with the second subtool selected, I'm going to turn on the RGB option. We can go to Color, Fill Object, and we could select the first mesh here and do a color fill object as well. And now let's change our material to something a bit more clear. We'll use the skin shade to get a nice vibrant color tone. And now we want to go through and just paint in those orange tips for these meshes. To do this, we can open up the brush palette and we have an option to choose the paintbrush. So selecting the paintbrush, this will give me a quick and easy access brush that I can go through and just simply choose a color. And now let's go in here and let's take a look at the tendrils. So we've lost some count here for the overall radial effect. So I'm going to go back into my radial count slider. I can go in here and let's just now paint in the tip areas, as well as let's take a look at the centralized points in here. So if I've lost my radial count for the adjustments that I've made here, we can simply go back and adjust these to the previous values. Or in this case, I can simply turn off symmetry. And let's just go in here and do some asymmetrical adjustments to randomize the overall effect. So I'm just simply clicking and holding to assign the paint to these tips here. And once we get the overall paint assigned, we can now hold the Shift key to lightly go in and sort of blend that paint as well as the sculpture detail. Now in this case, you'll see as I'm holding Shift, the RGB and Z-add option are on, which means that we're going to be smoothing our sculpt and our paint detail. If you'd like to smooth only the paint, we can undo that smooth adjustment here and hold Shift, and we can go in and disable these Z-add and Z-sub options. So now smooth is only affecting the RGB. So now going in and holding Shift, we can now blend that color on top of that surface without affecting any of our sculpture details. And then we can Alt select the original subtool. And let's do that one final sort of paint effect. So using this technique, we can easily come up with all kinds of abstract and creative shapes, and experimenting with these basic brushes, we can create all kinds of effects for different design techniques.